I think we need more nihilist health influencers who will sort of say, you know,
I need to.
When the question is asked, you know, should you eat white bread or brown bread or whatever it is, you know, that they'll sort of begin with the question. It sort of depends on your views on the intrinsic value of life. Also, if you're a bit of a utilitarian, I mean, people often say that being unhealthy might be unethical because in a country with nationalized healthcare,
you're a burden.
You're a burden, but are you? I mean, who costs the taxpayer more? The person who eats a bunch of burgers and has a heart attack and dies instantly, or the person who lives into old age and therefore has some kind of long-term health problem like Alzheimer's or dementia?
I need to interject here. So you ring me probably 4 years ago, you ring me, and I'm in the gym. And you say something like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "I'm in the gym. What are you doing?" "Oh, just whatever. Catch up a little bit." I was like, "What's going on? What's happening?" And you said, "I'm trying nihilism." And I said, "What do you mean?" And you went, "As a life philosophy, I'm trying nihilism." And I still don't know what you mean. So how is your experiment to make nihilism great again going?
Well, I was getting a bit fed up of people saying, "Oh, you're a nihilist. Oh, you're an atheist." Well, they wouldn't say it in the terms of nihilism. They'd say, "Oh, you're an atheist." Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there was a clip of Jordan Peterson on the Lex Friedman podcast, and he says, "Oh, you're secular, and you go to art galleries, yeah? Well, what makes you think you're secular?" And the head turn is real. He does that, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, what on earth are you talking about, man? You think you can't be an atheist and enjoy art? Now, I've tried my best to understand what he was getting at, and I think he was trying to basically say that in order to enjoy art, you need to have some kind of value, and in order to have any kind of surface level value, you can always ask the why that question. You know, why do you value this? Why, you know, the classic sort of why do you go to school to get a good grade? Well, you don't just want the grade. Why do you get the grade? You do it to get a good job, and so on and so forth. Happens with value. And so why do you value art? Because maybe you value beauty or something. And Peterson's whole thing is that whatever's at the top of this value hierarchy is, in his definition, divine. He just defines it as such. And so he essentially said that, like, you know, people claim that they are nihilists, but they don't live like that. I thought, well, what would it mean to really live like a nihilist? And, you know, I guess I tried to emphasize. But he's right to the extent that I think most people don't live like they're nihilists.
What would the definition of living like a nihilist be?
I think it would just mean the rejection of any such thing as a non-contingent reason for acting.
Be more accessible.
You would need to really think that there's no reason to do anything outside of essentially your crude preferences and biological drives.
Right.
And I think the reason why people think that nihilism is unlivable is because they have this image of somebody just immediately becoming a Raskolnikov type figure and just committing a murder or something. But they forget that these people still have their memory. You know, they're going to be embedded in a culture and an upbringing that their preferences are essentially still going to be aligned. I mean, Penn Jillette was once asked, if you're an atheist, why don't you kill and assault every person you want to? And he says, I do kill and assault everybody I want to, which is precisely nobody. You know, and very clever, gets a bit of an applause. But I mean, the difficult question ethically is what happens when somebody doesn't have that view? What happens when somebody does just disagree with you? But I don't know. It was kind of boring.
Just to interject there, so you could see the meaning-making machine of society and cultural norms as being useful to constrain the behavior of those outlier people, the ones who would go out and commit the litany of mass murders. But,
yes.
You know, mum told me that I'm not supposed to squash bugs when I was 5 years old, and this is now carried on through. But yeah, I think, you know, for most people, we are the descendants of the people who avoided, at least for the most part, killing people that were close to us. And we feel a lot of the time like we're now close to each other.
Yes. I think that's probably true. The issue is that the more that we try to explain away these mechanisms, we try to understand why in our evolutionary history we might have evolved certain moral taboos, this kind of stuff. It begins to essentially take the complete ethical force out of it, and that's what people think leads to nihilism. Once you have fully explained why something would be considered immoral, just on evolutionary grounds, you've essentially taken out the moral factor altogether, and you're just explaining it in terms of genetic preference.
Yeah, there's no more meaning. There's nothing. There's no additional fluff or feeling of anything. But this is, I've spent a lot of time over the last few years talking to evolutionary psychologists, evolutionary biologists, people that have looked at the evolution of culture as well from a mimetic standpoint too. And it does seem to me that culture is just like exclusively an adaptive response to coordination at large scale. And that all of the things that are encoded in that are effective ways for your tribe to not blow itself up.
Would you say the same thing about morality in general?
Yes.
So then how do you escape this nihilist conundrum that you think all it is, the reason why you're not killing people is just because you sort of evolved that way? Doesn't that kind of take out some of the meaning?
So I think if you were permanently self-assessing why you do the things you do and the inputs that you feel, but what that doesn't account for is the fact that we are self-deceptive.
Quite right, yeah.
And the sense of being a human is one that is imbued with meaning. I often use this term about how you are not personally cursed as a reassurance. And it was something that was reassuring to me. If I was spending a bit of time where I was feeling sad or down or whatever, it would feel like whatever emotion I was going through, whatever unpleasant emotion I was going through, was like a personal curse. And this makes sense when you look back at how the gods were personified as different sorts of emotions, right? That, Cupid had an arrow that hit you, or that, you had gods of war, you had gods of wrath, you had gods of envy, you had gods of narcissism, because the experience of a thing, of a thought, of an emotion, of a state is not just the confused chemical signals of your body. And now I can just reverse engineer this. Even the interaction of you and whatever's going on in the social group around you isn't just that. It's imbued with meaning because you interpret things in this soup of experience, which scales things up from just what's happening to, and it feels like there's something, it feels like there's some there, right?
Yes. Yeah. You can't escape that illusion if it is an illusion. This is another thing that I spoke to Ben about. First name basis, it seems now.
Mr. Shapiro.
Mr. Shapiro. I did try that in, when I was emailing back and forth about setting up that event, I went to type out sort of like, it'd be great to talk to Mr. Shapiro about, and it just didn't feel right. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. At least not behind his back. Not to say that I'm rude behind his back, but it felt even weirder that he wasn't there to sort of appreciate the courtesy. Anyway, he said, that I don't believe in free will. I don't know if you believe in free will. Perhaps we can talk about that. He's like, look, you don't believe in free will, but you act as if free will does exist all the time. And I remember thinking, what do you mean? What does it look like to act as though free will doesn't exist? The very argument, or one of the arguments against free will, is that you are essentially driven by your biology, your genes, your will. The Arthur Schopenhauer line that you can do what you will, you just can't will what you will. In fact, you have to do what you will. That's what drives behavior. If that's the case, then why do you have this vision in your head that if you lack a belief in free will, you're not going to get out of bed in the morning? The very argument is that you will get out of bed in the morning because you desire to go and get some breakfast. That's like the whole point. And so any argument of that form where people say, well, you don't live like that's the case, I always like to think, what would it look like to you then? If I could ask Jordan Peterson, when he says, well, you don't live like an atheist, what would that look like to you? And I don't know if he might say something like, well, you'd probably be this morally depraved, self-interested, blah, blah, blah. Maybe, but is that really what you think? I mean, I don't know.